Bom dia, neurolovers! Instabilidade acontece, mas vamos que vamos, bora pra frente? Vamos voltar um pouco a aula para ninguém perder o que estava acontecendo, beleza? É nóis! Fica com vocês!
You. So I'm going to try a strategy that I hope will work and keep things interesting and not be too repetitive. Now, I'm from Texas, and in Texas, we know a little bit about Brazil. We know about caipirinhas. We know about Brazilian steakhouses. So today, I want to be your personal chiaroscuro waiter and serve you a variety of dishes that I hope will be interesting and a little bit different. Now, in a real restaurant, you would have these cute little cards, red and green, that tell the waiter to stop or to keep on going. We won't be able to do that in this virtual format, but I will try and keep things moving along so that you won't need that red card. And one quick disclaimer before we get any farther. Unlike many of the preceding speakers, I am not a scientist. I am not a neuromarketing researcher. Rather, I am an entrepreneur, a business person, and an author. Now, to begin with, I'd like you to do one small thing for me. You can take your finger and simply tap the back of your other hand. Just one little tap, that's all. And so remember that for later. We'll get back to that. Now, I've been writing about neuromarketing since about 2004. And over the years, that led to my book, Brainfluence, which has been translated into Portuguese. I hope it's still available in that format, and about 10 other languages. My most recent book is Friction. Now, in marketing, we have a trust problem. About 10 years ago, a survey of CEOs found that 90% trusted their chief financial officer to be fully competent to do his or her job, and about the same number for their CIOs. But when it came to their chief marketing officers, only 20% were that confident. That means 4 out of 5 of those CEOs surveyed weren't too sure about their marketing person. A few years later, another survey showed that 70% of their CEOs had lost trust in marketing. Even more recently, Harvard Business Review posted an article about why chief marketing officers have such short times in their jobs. Now, you might ask why this is, and I think it's because most marketing money is wasted. We know that a vast percentage of new products fail. We know that emails get terrible response rates. And often marketers deal with that problem by sending out even more emails, further depressing the response rates. There's probably no better indicator of marketing waste than e-commerce abandoned shopping carts. One estimate puts the annual number at $4.6 trillion compared to actual sales of about $2 trillion. That's a huge amount of waste. Think of all the money that went into pay-per-click ads, social media, content marketing, web design, everything else that attracted people to the website, got them to shop around, actually put stuff in their shopping cart, but then failed to get them across the finish line. Now, I could go on with the depressing statistics. You may well have some depressing statistics of your own, but I think what it's clear that we need is a revolution. And fortunately, we have one. For thousands of years, people thought that the Earth was the center of the universe. And then Galileo and Copernicus came along and showed that we weren't even the center of our own little solar system. Similarly, for thousands of years, people thought that the conscious mind was the center of human behavior. And as John Barg from Yale so eloquently puts it, just as Galileo moved the Earth from the center of the universe, so too does the current scientific revolution move the conscious mind from the center of human behavior. So this begs a question. Why, after thousands and thousands of academic papers, millions, literally millions of books being sold, 2 Nobel Prizes, why are marketers still focused on logic and reason to persuade their customers? It's really important that we all remember who's in charge, and it is not Mr. Spock. Now, when we think about the brain, Gerald Zaltman of Harvard estimates that only 5% of our decision-making processes are conscious, and that 95% are non-conscious. And so this begs the question, how do we know what's going on in that vast non-conscious area of activity? And one answer, as you might guess from this conference at least, is neuromarketing, also called consumer neuroscience. Now, this takes a lot of forms. Over the years, it's included EEG, it's included biometrics, it's included facial coding, implicit testing, a whole variety of tools. And I'm not going to go into those because you've already heard about at least a few of those techniques. But I do want to leave you with one thought from Temple University, major US research university, that a few years ago conducted a major study of neuromarketing techniques. Their results were mixed across techniques, but their most important conclusion was that they found that neurophysiological measures could predict ad success. To me, this was a huge step in legitimizing the field of neuromarketing and should lead to additional academic work in the coming years. Now, one other thing I want to address very briefly is the question of business to consumer or business to business. Usually we think of neuromarketing in terms of B2C, but it has a role in B2B as well. Because I think the biggest lie in B2B marketing is that those customers make rational decisions. If you look at the B2B literature, you will find all kinds of processes for how B2B customers decide, buying journeys and whatnot. And these aren't necessarily wrong, but they overlook the point that B2B customers are human and they are subject to the same cognitive biases that all humans are. So what I want to do here in the next little bit is give you at least a few tools that will help you address that non-conscious decision-making process in your customer's mind. And it's important to use the right tool for the particular job. For example, if you're trying to improve how your brand is perceived, that's totally different than if you're trying to get the consumers to pay attention to your ad. If you're trying to increase conversion rates on your website, that's different than if you're trying to increase customer loyalty. So what I'm going to do here is our very first course is talk a little bit about what I see neuromarketing as in 2021. I see that neuromarketing falls on a couple of spectra. The first is neuroscience, or the hard tools of neuroscience on one end, and behavioral science on the other. And it isn't either or. I think it's a continuum. Similarly, we can use these tools to look at very specific problems. For instance, comparing how ad A versus ad B lights up a customer's brain, or trying to use these tools in a much more general sense. In other words, develop general concepts that we can apply across our marketing and sales efforts without having to evaluate each one using neuromarketing tools. And I'll give you one example of this, and that's eye tracking. This is commonly referred to as a tool of consumer neuroscience. It's included in many types of neuromarketing studies, but really, I would argue that it is not so much a neuroscience tool as a behavior tool. You are measuring how customers behave when they are exposed to your ad or product or whatever. And I'm not the only person to think this way. For years, the biggest player in this space was Nielsen Consumer Neuroscience. Back in 2019, they took their entire staff of neuroscientists and repurposed them, or at least additionally purposed them as trainers and consultants in behavioral science, because they saw the utility of this as well. Now, in 2020, they ran into some difficulties. When the pandemic hit, with their big global footprint of all these offices, they scaled back their neuromarketing staff tremendously, went from about 20 neuroscientists to 3 neuroscientists. But I don't believe that invalidates the concept of neuromarketing. I think that was really more a specific situation with their business and how they reacted to the problems from the pandemic. I see this trend toward applying behavioral science in many big brands. Think about Google, Walmart, big banking firms. All of these companies now have behavioral science units. I've been lucky enough to talk to not one, but 2 of the global heads of behavioral science at Walmart. And they have a specific process for applying these tools. They will identify a problem or goal. And it isn't even the behavioral scientists that do this. Typically, it is people in marketing. Maybe they're trying to increase conversion on some part of their website. Maybe they're trying to change consumer behavior in their Sam's Club stores. Maybe human resources is trying to change an employee behavior in some way. In any case, first the problem is identified, then they go to the literature and try and create a hypothesis for an intervention that will improve the situation. And once they have this, they don't go out and then develop, say, an expensive mobile app or something of that nature. Instead, they pilot it, they test it in as simple and cheap a way as possible. For instance, instead of developing a mobile app at a cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars, they will send one of their team members into a Sam's Club with a clipboard to try and sort of simulate what that mobile app might do for a customer, and then evaluate what did they learn. And from there, they can perhaps modify the process a little bit and try again. They can scale it up to the next level, perhaps create a very crude app that they can hand people on an iPad as they walk in or something like that. Or eventually they can scale it up and roll it out across all of their stores or all of their websites and such. Now, you might ask, how do we begin to apply these tools of behavioral science? And that's kind of beyond the scope of our talk here today, but I think we can hit a few high points. And we have to begin with Robert Cialdini, who invented the science of influence and the science of persuasion psychology back decades ago. He's famous for his originally 6, now 7 principles, things like social proof. When other people do something, you're more likely to do that thing. Reciprocation. If I do something for you, you're more likely to do something for me in return, and so on. I'm excited to say that he has a new version of his classic book, Influence, coming out just a little bit later this year. So that's something that we can all look forward to. Now, B.J. Fogg is a researcher at Stanford who's one of the pioneers in behavior design. And he's most well known for his Fogg behavior model. And he says you need 3 things to create or change a behavior. You have to have motivation. The person has to want to do the behavior or want the result of doing the behavior. There has to be ability. That translates into lack of difficulty or not too much effort to do. And then finally, there has to be a trigger, or as he now calls it, a prompt, something to get the ball rolling. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner in this space, wrote his amazing book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which continues to influence people in practically every industry you can imagine. And one of his key insights was that we have 2 ways of thinking, system 1 and system 2. I'm sure you've already heard about that more than once, but we know that system 1 is that non-conscious, fast, intuitive, rule-based, low-effort decision-making process. And system 2 is that rational, logical, conscious, grind-through-it sort of thinking that he found our brains don't like to be in. If we have a choice, we will use the default system, system 1, for making a decision. We have the field of evolutionary psychology. Jeffrey Miller is one of the players in that space. He wrote an entire book called Spent on how our modern consumer behavior is driven by patterns that were laid down tens of thousands of years ago. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other researchers around the world who are constantly conducting studies and publishing research that in many cases we can apply to our marketing problems and our business problems. So how do we do that? Well, that brings up our next course. A few years ago, I created my own little framework called the Persuasion Slide. It's based on the children's playground toy or tool, the slide, and there's 4 elements in it. We'll go through those, but each element has a conscious and a non-conscious component so that as we think about our marketing and persuasion processes, we can remember to incorporate both conscious and non-conscious processes. Now, I'm using conscious and non-conscious as a shorthand. We could talk about rational and emotional, system 2 or system 1, an analytical, rational versus heuristic or rule-based. There are many ways to slice and dice this, but for shorthand, most of the time, I will talk about conscious and non-conscious, recognizing that these are not all exactly equivalent. So if you are marketing perfume, for example, or fragrances, you will mostly be at the non-conscious end of the spectrum. You don't see many perfume marketers talking about the exact amounts of essential oils in their fragrances, or how their product tested 83% better than some competitor's product. They use emotional imagery. They show you pictures of people that you would like to be, or perhaps like to be with. On the other hand, If you're selling industrial machinery, you're going to be pretty heavily at the conscious end of the spectrum. Yes, you may still use those non-conscious cues to exploit a cognitive bias here or there because B2B customers are human, but it's important to assure your potential buyers that your product will do all the things they need, that it will meet their specifications, it has appropriate guarantees, and so on. Now, we think of Amazon as being a kind of conscious type of marketer. It's all facts and figures and text, but just in the visible part of a typical product page, we see a lot of non-conscious cues. We see social proof in a couple forms. We see number of reviews indicating a level of popularity for the product, and also the star ratings for the reviews indicating what those people thought about the product. We see free in multiple places on most product pages. Free was found by Dan Ariely to be a much more powerful motivator to our brain than the actual value of whatever the free thing is. We see free and our brain lights up. They use scarcity. If a product is in short supply, they will put in big color type the limited number that are left to encourage you to buy before you miss out. They hide much of the descriptive text, which not only serves to shorten up their rather long pages, but also there is research that shows that if you give people too much information, they may delay making any decision. They may say, oh, I need to think about this. Maybe I need to shop around. So that information is there for those people who really need it, but it is hidden for anybody else where it might simply slow down their decision making. And finally, just out of view, we see another Cialdini's principle, authority. In this case, favorable commentary from best-selling authors and subject matter experts. Now, the next element in the slide is gravity. We know that gravity is why slides work in the real world. And in our framework, it represents your customers' motivations. This is their initial motivation, nothing that you provide. This is what they are coming to you with, their needs, their wants, their goals. And it's important to always focus on gravity. You should never ask people to do something for you because you're fighting gravity when you're doing that. And right now you're saying, well, I would never do that. How many times have you gone to a website and the very first thing you see is a stupid pop-up that's going to ask you to do a survey after you're done, and you have to figure out how to close this stupid thing so that you can get on with either buying something or learning more about the company or whatever you went to that website for. Instead, you should work with gravity. Show immediately how you are going to fit your customers' goals, their needs, their wants. Neil Patel is a digital marketing guy who is an expert in traffic generation. When you go to his website, immediately you are prompted, do you want more traffic? Now, if you're visiting his site, chances are you got there because you want more traffic. That's what he specializes in. And so he's immediately aligning with the gravity of the customers who are coming there. Same thing for Ann Hanley. She is a marketing and copywriting expert. She says, immediately assures the visitor, you are at the right place for ridiculously good marketing. Totally aligned with gravity. Now, we have conscious motivation and non-conscious motivation. If you ask somebody why they are buying a car, they would probably talk about, well, I need transportation. They would want to make sure that it fits everybody in their family, including the dog. They want to know about the resale value, the fuel economy. These are all conscious motivators, and they are important. If you're buying a car, it's a major purchase. But if this was the only motivation people had, everybody would be driving smart cars or 15-year-old expensive used cars. We know that's not the case. We know that there are many non-conscious motivators that people may not recognize themselves. They may not think that this is important, even though it may be. People may buy a car because they want their neighbors to view them as prosperous, as successful, as living a desirable lifestyle. They may think that this car will make them more attractive to other people. They may buy a car that signals something about them and what's important to them. They may pay a premium for an environmentally friendly car to show everybody else that, hey, this may not actually affect the environment in a real way, but I am showing you that this is something important to me. And of course, we have fantasy. The new Hummer EV from General Motors will cost well over $100,000. Most of their marketing shows it going through forests, through deserts, bouncing over boulders. I am willing to bet that not one of their customers out of 100 is going to risk getting a chip off the paint of their $100,000 vehicle by going on anything other than a paved road. But they know that if they did want to go on that desert trail, they could do it. The same thing applies to, say, a luxury watch. How many Rolex owners have ever taken their watch down to its 300-meter tested depth, or even 30 meters or 3 meters? Probably most are afraid to get it wet in the shower. But again, they know that this watch has that capability if they ever want to do it. So think about, what are your customers' motivations, both their conscious ones, those things that are an important part of their decision-making process, but also their non-conscious ones. Now, the next element in the slide is the nudge. That's when mom or dad gives the child a little push at the top of the slide to get them moving. And in our framework, it represents getting your customers' attention and getting them a little bit motivated. And it could take many forms. It could be an email, a pop-up ad, a search ad, a visible call to action, a phone call, a sales call, anything that gets the customer's attention and starts that motivation process. Now, Rubens Sant Anna is an internet marketer who was actually a student of B.J. Fogg's at Stanford. So he understands a little bit about persuasion psychology and behavior design. When you go to his website, which is iwillteachyoutoberich.com. So clearly, people are coming there who want to earn more money. That's what he does. He teaches people through courses and such how to make more money, how to be successful in their career or as an entrepreneur. And he has multiple nudges there. His objective is to get you to subscribe to his newsletter. He doesn't expect to sell you anything instantly, but he does want you to subscribe so that he can market to you and ultimately sell you one of his courses or something else. He has a little nudge suggesting that you subscribe, join 400,000 other subscribers who want to also earn more money or make more money. But his main nudge takes up the entire visible area of the page, and it's a very soft nudge. He doesn't say, give me your email address and I'll send you good stuff. He says, do you know your earning potential? I can tell you, just start here, click here. And it's a very gentle nudge, but it's also non-threatening. I'm willing to bet that 10 times as many people click this nudge and say, okay, I just want to subscribe to this. But by the time you get through this process, you will, at that point, be nudged. Okay, if you want to find out your earning potential now, I will send that to you. Please give me your email address. And just in case you don't respond to either of these nudges, there's also an exit intent pop-up that will say, hey, why don't you try that quiz to learn your earning potential? The important parts of the nudge must be seen, first of all, and it has to start that process, because a nudge that provides no motivation at all is an ineffective nudge. I'll give you one example. LinkedIn can nudge you by putting your picture in someone else's ad. Now you pretty much have to look at that. It's good at getting your attention because you see your picture in an unexpected part of the page. But in this case, they nudged me to follow Comcast Business, an internet service provider whose territory I'm not in. They didn't say they were going to send me great content. They didn't say they were going to give me discounts or do anything for me. So there was no motivation, and I ignored this nudge, as I'm sure 99.99% of the other people did. Now you can have non-conscious nudges too. This is a nudge to view a funny basketball video, but they don't show a basketball player falling backwards into the stands or doing something funny. They show an attractive woman, probably because their testing showed that this got more clicks to their basketball video. Now, they aren't saying we are going to show you pictures of attractive women, but non-consciously, people are saying, I'm going to watch this basketball video, but in the back of their mind, they're thinking, oh, wow, there's probably attractive women here too. So think about how you are nudging, prompting, triggering your customers. Are you doing it in a way that gets their attention? And are you adding that little bit of motivation to make sure that they move on to the next step in your process so they can complete that process? Now, the angle of the slide is obviously, in the real world, what gets kids to the bottom. If it's not a very steep slide, they don't go all the way down. If it's very steep, they go down very quickly. And it represents the motivation that you provide in our framework. These can be conscious motivators, things like your products or services, features, your benefits, discounts, your pricing, gifts that you may offer. anything that your customer is going to process consciously and say, okay, this will be something that solves my particular need. But you can use non-conscious motivators, emotional appeals, appeals based on psychology, appeals that exploit cognitive biases that all humans have. Usually, it's a good idea to incorporate both conscious and non-conscious motivators. Now, conscious things can be things like how powerful your product is, how much money your product will save the customer, whether there's a money-back guarantee. You can use gifts and discounts. These are very common conscious motivators. Even Ramit does that as well. If you didn't respond to his other nudges, he says, okay, hey, I will give you these 4 valuable books that will teach you important skills if you give me your email address. So he does that. It's a very conscious sort of a motivator, but just in case you didn't respond to his others, he does it again. In the retail world, sales are an incredibly important nudge and motivator. In the US, at least, retailers typically send a weekly flyer to their customers, and it's full of this week's sale prices. A few years back, one major retailer decided to buck the trend, stop the insanity, because really it is sort of crazy. The list prices for their products at a typical, let's say, apparel retailer are set very high. Nobody buys at those prices, but every week, a huge portion of the inventory gets marked down 30, 40, 50%, and people come in and buy. This retailer with a new CEO said, well, let's stop doing this. Let us make things easy for our customers. We'll have everyday low prices. They will know that if they go into the store, they'll get the best price on any product that they see. They won't have to worry that, wow, next week it's going to be cheaper. Did this work? No, actually it didn't. Within a year, their sales had fallen so much that the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. What was happening was, without the discounts, there was no motivation. They were still nudging their customers with these weekly flyers, nice colored pictures of the products that were appropriate for that season, but they did not have that additional motivating factor of the sales that were going to expire in a few days. They fired that CEO, went back to all sales all the time, and at least for a period of years, managed to regain their equilibrium, at least until the pandemic hit and the retail apocalypse intensified. The problem is that using these kinds of tools, giving people free stuff, giving people discounts, giving free shipping, and so on, all of this costs money. It's expensive. Yes, you can increase motivation, but you're also reducing your profit potential. Non-conscious motivators are usually free because they may simply represent a change in imagery or in the advertising copy or headline, and they can even be more effective sometimes than these conscious motivators. And I'm talking about things like social proof, which we already alluded to. We saw Rubens Sant Anna. Hey, 400,000 people are subscribing to my newsletter right now, so surely it must be of some value. We see that all the time. Brands talk about how many customers they have, how many people, how popular their brand is, and so on. We're the number one product in our category. Authority is another one of Cialdini's 6 original principles. And when my book Friction was coming out, my publisher elected to bump a Nobel Prize winner, Richard Thaler's endorsement to the back cover in order to put the authority on authority, Robert Cialdini, on the front cover. Scarcity is another one of Cialdini's principles, and it includes things like urgency and fear of missing out. Brands in the travel space use this all the time. You go to any travel website, whether it's an airline or something like Expedia or Booking, you will see all these scarcity queues. There's only 2 rooms left at this price, only 2 seats on the airplane. This deal expires tomorrow. All of these things are telling you that you need to act right now. And these brands employ behavioral scientists. They use these techniques because they work. They test constantly. And if you see them using a technique, it's because it is causing their conversion rates to go up. You can even make your own scarcity if you have no scarcity problems with your product or your service. You can have an offer that expires at a specific time. You can have a fixed number of products available at a price that when they're gone, they're gone. You may offer more at that price at another point, but you can create these things. You can even use sort of soft scarcity cues like a limited supply or this program is filling up fast. A fear of missing out is a scarcity cue. People don't want to think they're missing out, and that's because Daniel Kahneman and other researchers have found that losses are more important or more significant to our brains than gains are. So if you can frame your benefit in terms of a loss, often that will work better than if you frame it in terms of a gain. For example, if you are trying to get people to attend your conference, you can talk about gain framing, learn new skills, meet your peers. These are all positive things that will happen if you attend that conference. But you could also use loss framing, things like you might lose sales if you don't attend the conference. Don't miss out. And these can be perhaps even greater triggers depending on the person and how you use them. But not everything relates to these major principles in persuasion psychology. This is a price, and this is a price. Those two prices look the same. In fact, if you are female, they are more or less the same. But if you are a male viewing those prices, that sale price in red is going to appear to be about twice as big of a discount, according to one study, than that same exact sale price printed in black. Another crazy study had people sample tomato soup. It was all the same soup, of course. Half of the subjects saw it with a sign using a simple typewriter font. The other half saw it with a sign with a slightly more elegant Lucinda font. That group thought that the soup tasted better on average, and they were twice as likely to say that they would buy that soup. Same exact soup, but a two-time difference in willingness or intention to purchase. Now, I could go on with these, but it's important for you to not assume that because something worked for somebody else, you saw it in a magazine, you heard it at a conference like this, that it will work in your situation. There's an entire discipline called conversion optimization or conversion rate optimization that measures exactly how effective different types of changes to your pitch are, whether it is a different image, a different headline, different copy, or so on. Try different things. Use some of these very accessible, often very inexpensive tools to see what is going to work in your situation. So now it's time for our next course. Many years ago, I had a little specialty lock that was frozen. The key wouldn't turn, so I took it to a locksmith. He looked at it, grabbed a can of some stuff from under his counter, took it out, gave it a squirt, and lo and behold, the key turned. The lock began working perfectly. He wouldn't take payment for fixing my lock, but he did sell me a can of the stuff that I'd never seen or heard of before. Now, here's the weird thing, a weird coincidence. A week later, I was at a Formula One race outside Toronto, and what did I see in the pit garage next to one of these exotic machines but a can of the exact same stuff that locksmith had sold me? Now, you might be wondering what it was, but probably at least a few of you have guessed that it was WD-40, because we know we can fix anything with two things. If it moves and it's not supposed to, we duct tape it. If it doesn't move and it's supposed to, we WD-40 it. Now, in the physical world, mechanical problems tend to be pretty easy to solve. In the business world, not so easy. Wouldn't it be great if there was a magic spray like that locksmith sold me that would give you more loyal customers and more engaged team members? Well, bad news, there is no magic spray, but there is one strategy, a friction-based strategy that can give you those benefits and many more. And by friction, I'm talking about the final element in the persuasion slide. It is difficulty, both real and perceived. If you've ever seen a kid get stuck partway down a slide, it's because the slide isn't slippery enough. There's too much friction. And my simplest definition of friction is any unnecessary effort to perform a task. Any unnecessary effort to perform a task. And the fact is that even in 2021, friction is everywhere. Usually we don't see it. If we do see it, we ignore it. We say, oh, it just has to be that way. There's not a better way. We've always done it that way. That's it. I'll give you an example that I know you are familiar with. For most of my life, I thought taxis were an effort saver. They were easier, faster than taking a bus. They are much less effort than walking a long distance. They were friction reducers. And then Uber came along, and suddenly I and everybody else saw how much friction there was in that taxi process, from trying to hail one by the side of the street, waving your arm, to wondering, you've booked that ride for the airport, they're 2 minutes late. Now, where are they? Did they forget about you? Did they lose your request? Are you going to miss your flight? Or with Uber, you can simply look at the app and say, oh, they're right around the corner. I don't have to worry. To finally paying instead of having to fumble for your wallet and credit cards or cash and deal with bulky machines and mobile internet connections on their machine and so on. You just say goodbye, and it's all taken care of automatically. Currency exchange, no problem. It's all done. Now, if I have to take a conventional taxi, it seems like a pretty high friction experience to me. And here's an even more contemporary example. We're all doing a lot of virtual stuff these days, and one name has become synonymous with that virtual conferencing or virtual meeting. And in 2019, that most likely might have been, say, WebEx, the market leader, Skype, Google Hangouts. But as we know, in 2020, Zoom became, much like Google is for search, the default term for any kind of virtual conference or virtual conversation. And this is not a pandemic phenomenon, though. Years before, they were already accelerating past their competition. And of course, when the pandemic hit, that just kicked them into a much higher gear. They quadrupled their revenue in just the first few months. They added 100,000 new paying customers in the first few months. And why did they succeed when their better financed, bigger competitors didn't? And I think it relates to their mission statement, which is very simply make communications frictionless. Now, that itself is a low friction mission statement, but it provides perfect clarity to, say, an app developer. I'm going to add this feature. How is this going to affect our company's mission? Is it going to make it easier, or is it going to add complexity? And if it's going to make the process more frictionless, reduce friction, they'll do it. If not, maybe they don't do it, or at least they go to their boss and say, hey, how do we deal with this? I tried to find Cisco's mission statement, the parent company of WebEx. I looked on their website, couldn't find it. I used Google to search their website, still couldn't find it. Finally, on a third-party site, I found an old one, and it talks about shaping the future of the internet by creating unprecedented value for customers, employees, investors, ecosystem partners, whatever they are. Who knows? What does this mission statement even mean? This is a high-friction mission statement, provides no clarity to their team members as to what I'm doing, creating unprecedented value for all these different people. Who knows? So my promise to you in this next little section here is to give you a set of friction goggles, imaginary goggles, but you will be seeing more friction than you were before. So let's talk about the science of friction. And I assume we have a few dog people in our audience today. This was my little pup about 11 years ago. He's getting older now, lays around a lot. His favorite hobby is taking naps, but there's one thing that gets his attention, and that is food. So I decided to conduct a little experiment. This is a regular dog food bowl. This is a slow feeder bowl. It slows down dogs who gulp their food too quickly. This is a treat ball. Dogs have to roll it around and shake it and squeeze it to get the food pellets out. I decided to see how long it would take him to consume a meal in each condition. It took about half a minute in the regular bowl, about 5 times as long in the slow feeder, and in the treat ball, about 10 minutes. That's about 20 times more effort than the regular dog food bowl. Now, you might think that he would be aggravated by this, but in fact, no, we're still friends. The key takeaway from this is that in every single condition, his motivation was so high that he consumed 100% of the food. Did not matter how hard he had to work for it, he consumed 100%. Here's the bad news. Your customers are not dogs. If what you are asking them to do is any more difficult, any more effort than whatever their alternative is, they will most likely take that alternative, because friction changes behavior. Friction changes behavior. This is based on the law of least effort. It goes back at least to the Middle Ages. More recently, Daniel Kahneman says that there is a law of least effort that applies to cognitive as well as physical exertion, and that people are fundamentally pretty lazy. I'll give you one example of this. The last international conference I was able to attend was on the lovely Dutch island of Texel. Beautiful hotel in sand dunes, all these walking paths. On this path, there was a little wood gate. It was not locked. It took almost no effort to push open. But despite that, many, if not most people, had decided to walk around the gate rather than exert the minimal effort of pushing it open. In fact, this phenomenon is so common, there's a name for it. These are called desire paths. When your customers find an easier way of doing whatever it is you wanted them to do. Like, did the designers of this roundabout really think people were going to walk around in a circular pattern? Of course not. Now, you can deal with this in a couple of ways. You can try and correct your customers' behavior and make sure they do it the way that you want them to. Or the way I recommend doing it is making their path even easier. Pave that path that they created to make it maximally easy. Now, BJ Fogg himself focuses of these three elements of his model on ability. In fact, he says, don't focus on motivating people to do stuff. Focus on increasing ability, making that thing easier to do. And in fact, Richard Thaler says very simply, if you want to encourage some activity, make it easy. This is pretty much what earned him his Nobel Prize. But it's amazing to me how many business leaders still have not internalized this and applied it to their customer experience, to their employee experience. So let's move on to our next course. Acquiring customers is important. New customers are great, but loyal customers are even better. These are your most valuable customers. They're your highest revenue customers. You don't have ongoing acquisition costs. They are more likely to recommend you to other customers. We all know how important that is. So these should be focused, you should be focused on building these loyal customers. But how do we define loyalty? We could talk about repeat purchases. We could talk about avoiding competitors, but I think that true loyalty can be tested. And if one brand that I am very loyal to is Amazon's Prime service. I make most of my online purchases through them. And a few years ago, in my home state of Texas, my loyalty was tested. They began charging sales tax for the state of Texas, where other e-commerce companies were not yet doing that. Now, I vowed that I would shop around. It would be stupid to pay an extra 8%. When I look back a year later, my behavior had changed almost zero. Why? I was too loyal to Amazon. I trusted them more than I trusted other people with my credit card information. I trusted they would get it to me when they said they would get it to me versus someone else's delivery promise. It was simply too easy to keep doing business with them, clicking that one-click button. True loyalty is emotional. It's not rational, and it's unconscious the way mine was. Consciously, I said, I'm going to shop around. Unconsciously, I said, I'm going to keep doing business with Amazon. What drives true loyalty, research shows, is low friction. Gartner, the big market research company, did some amazing research on customer service interactions. They found the people who had a high effort interaction said there were 96% of those people said they would likely be disloyal to that brand. That's 10 times as high as those customers who had a low effort interaction. Similarly, 94% of the low effort customers said they would buy again. Only 4% of the high effort customers said they would buy again. And we know how important word of mouth is. People want ratings, they want reviews, they want to know what other people think. 88% of those high effort customers said they would say bad things about the brand, compared to just 1% of the low effort customers. Let's recap those numbers. They're crazy. 94% of the customers who had a high effort experience said they would be disloyal. 4% said they would buy again. 88% said they would say bad things about the brand. This sounds pretty scary, right? Well, I have something that's even more scary. This effort is in your customer's head. There is not an absolute standard of effort where you can say, okay, now I am low effort. You can't even say my effort is better than my competitor's effort. They are comparing you to whatever they think low effort is. They're comparing you to Amazon, to Uber, or to something else that they find to be very easy. And if you are making them work harder, then you are high effort. Low friction experiences drive loyalty. So let's look at some real types of friction. Forms are friction. Customers hate forms. They hate paper forms, web forms, mobile forms, doesn't matter. They hate them. However many steps there are in a process, usually the more steps, the more effort there is, the more friction there is in that process. If people have to read instructions, if whatever you want them to do isn't intuitive, if it isn't obvious, that is friction. If they're confused about what to do next, they're partway through your process and suddenly they have to pause and, okay, where do I go now? That is friction. And of course, as Gartner's research showed, any kind of high effort interaction, whether it's tech support, a return, customer support, a question, anything, that is friction. Strive for frictionless in every aspect of your business. I'm going to give you an example I've been using for a long time. I'm hoping that Staples has improved their processes by now, but I needed some ink for my printer. And I knew that Staples, I was an existing customer, I knew they would deliver it to me the next day for free. That's even faster than Amazon would do it. So I went to their website, dropped the product in my cart, found it very easily, went to check out, and I saw this horrendously long order form. I was not logged in, even though I was an existing customer. Furthermore, perhaps because they had coded the form that way, my browser would not autofill my login information for me. So at that point, I had a dilemma. Do I try and hunt down my login information for staples.com? Probably a high effort process with no guarantee of success. Do I do a password reset process, which always seems to take longer? Then, of course, I've got to reset it on other devices as well. Or do I check out as a guest using this horribly long form? I did none of those. I jumped in my car, went to Office Max. 30 minutes later, I was back in my office. The ink was in my printer, and my original Staples ink was still in my shopping cart, part of that $4.6 trillion in abandoned merchandise. Contrast that with Amazon, where they have taken almost all the friction out of their ordering process. You're always logged in when you go to Amazon.com. You have to reformat your hard drive to log out of Amazon. Back in 1997, when most companies were just trying to figure out what e-commerce was, Jeff Bezos was talking about frictionless shopping. The year after that, they patented one-click ordering. A lot of companies didn't think you could do that. Barnes & Noble, their chief competitor then, implemented a similar process on their site, and pretty soon they were in a big legal fight with Amazon. After a few years in court and millions of dollars in legal fees, Amazon won. Their patent was declared valid. Now, what did they get for all that time and those millions of dollars? Remember at the very beginning, that one little tap? That is the level of effort that they imposed on their competition. Barnes & Noble had to add an extra click. They added a confirm order button after their order now button. Doesn't seem like much effort. Doesn't seem like it'd be worth millions of dollars, does it? But there was one other smart guy at that same time. Steve Jobs was about to introduce Apple's new music store. He saw one-click ordering. Apple didn't try and work around the patent. They didn't try and fight it in court the way Barnes & Noble did. They paid Amazon $1 million so they could have that one tiny little click advantage over their competitors. And we know that worked out pretty well for Apple. And it's not just their ordering process, it is every part of their business. Years ago, Amazon identified what they called wrap rage. You know what I'm talking about, these horrible heat-sealed clamshell products made with plastic. You've got to cut your way into them with sharp implements like scissors or knives or machetes. If you don't stab yourself with a sharp implement, you're likely to stab yourself on a plastic shard. Amazon created frustration-free packaging. Very simple idea, simple cardboard boxes you can open with your bare hands, minimal risk of personal injury, better for the environment. People like the packaging. Here is the crazy thing. Not only do people like the packaging better, there was a huge reduction in negative feedback on the products packaged that way. People liked the products themselves better, even though they were the same products. Amazon even makes returns easy. If you sell physical products, you know returns are horrible things. But Amazon doesn't discourage returns. They make it easy. Even if you've destroyed your product's package, even if you don't know how to print a shipping label, you can take your mobile phone and your bare product to UPS. They will pack it up for you and return it to Amazon free of charge. Does this cost Amazon money? Yes, it's very expensive. But this is why in 2019, when everybody else was trying to cut into their market share, not only did their sales increase, their market share went up 10%. And when the pandemic hit, they just took off like crazy. They added 400,000 new jobs. Imagine that, almost 500,000 new jobs in a year to keep up with demand. As Jeff Bezos puts it, when you reduce friction, make something easy, people do more of it. And in their case, that has meant ordered a lot more stuff, watched more videos, listened to more music, done a lot of the things Amazon wants them to do. Google is another company that has been very cognizant of customer effort, user effort since their earliest days. I could give you a dozen ways they do that, but I'm going to focus just on one, and that is autocomplete tags. They introduced these things years ago. It's code that can be put into your web forms or mobile forms that will let a customer fill out that form using data they've entered before, so that with a few keystrokes or screen taps, they can fill out even a lengthy form. Even today in 2021, I find that probably half the forms I see are not properly implementing autocomplete tags. I went to register for a tech conference. There were a dozen fields in this form, a long form. Every single field populated with the word Roger because the coder had gotten lazy, taken one field from another form, simply replicated it, changed the visible part so it looked okay. If you look at the web page, it looked okay to his boss and the marketing manager. But every customer who wanted to register for that conference had to manually type in their email address, type in their company name, type in their street address. Hundreds of unnecessary wasted keystrokes because of this minor coding error. So I encourage you to find your friction. You can do that by observing your customers. Watch what they're doing either in person or remotely. You can do lab testing, but you don't have to do that. A lot of tests can be conducted very simply and cheaply over the web. If you're rolling out a change to your mobile app or to your website, you can get responses back from web panels in just a few hours to find out if real humans find it as easy and obvious as your team does. You can use tools like eye tracking, where people are actually looking at it. They're looking at what you want them to look at. You can do click tracking, and I guarantee you, if you are not doing click tracking now and you implement it, you'll find that people are clicking on stuff that is not clickable. And when you find that a lot of people are clicking on something like that, and go to your web designer or your app designer and say, hey, people are clicking on this, they are likely to tell you that's because customers are stupid. They don't know what they're doing. No. If a lot of customers are clicking on something that's not clickable, it is not the customer that is stupid. It is the design that is stupid. If you've got sufficient volume, you can use things like behavioral analytics right down to the SKU level like Walmart does. And there's other behavior metrics. You can measure rage clicking. That's when people are clicking on something repeatedly because it's not doing whatever they expect it to do, and they keep clicking it rapidly to hoping that maybe it'll finally work. You can even do profanity detection in your voice menus. But let me give you a pro tip. If people are cursing at your voice menus, you're doing it wrong. Whatever you do, use something. Watch that customer behavior, measure it, and be sure that you are minimizing customer effort, because friction changes behavior. And I encourage you to strive for a friction-free culture, not just with your customer experience, but with your employee experience too. I don't have time to get into that piece today, but that can be equally important to your business success. Now, I am pretty sure that I have delivered on my promise to give each of you a set of friction goggles, because once you start seeing friction, you can't stop. I have turned on your brain's reticular activating system for seeing friction. Your RAS is what lets you cross Times Square in Manhattan by filtering out all that irrelevant stuff and only letting through oncoming cars, the pedestrians right around you, and the crosswalk indicator. You've had your own RAS experience, I can guarantee. If you've ever bought a new car or a new to you car, within a week, you start seeing your car everywhere. It's like, where were all those cars? I didn't notice them before. You didn't notice them, but they were there just previously. Your RAS filtered them out. Now it's letting them through because it's thinking, oh, this might be important. Looks like my car. So I encourage you to keep activating your RAS for friction. Jot it down, do a screen grab if it's digital, take a picture if it's in real life. The more you activate your RAS, the more you will keep seeing. And you have my permission to expose bad user experience and bad customer experience, whether it's within your organization or whether you encounter it someplace else. Make the world a better place. And you have my permission to push back in your organization against those people who have important functions, legal people, compliance, accounting, security. Their jobs are all important, but They do not necessarily have customer experience in their job description as a primary function. And sometimes a higher level of authority needs to make that trade-off. I joke about Amazon and not having much security. Actually, they do have security, but they have made it very nuanced. If you engage in a high-risk transaction there, like sending gift cards to people, they will re-authenticate you, but they have coded their website in a way that screens out those high-risk transactions, says, okay, we're going to put a higher level of security on these, where so many companies take the simple, easy, cheap approach of simply creating a wall. If you're inside it, you can do anything. If you're outside it, you can't do anything. So push back, if necessary, escalate. And when you encounter this guy, and you probably will encounter this guy, who says something like, high effort, it's just a few clicks. That's not effort. It's a best practice. Everybody else does it. People are used to it. Doesn't matter. Tell them that one tiny little click was worth millions of dollars to both Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs. Use that one-click story to be persuasive. Now, about this point, you might be holding up that red card saying, enough, my brain is full. So let's conclude with 3 very tiny dessert items here. One, I encourage you to use non-conscious influence techniques. We talked about a few of them. There are many, many more. Read some of the great books on the topic, not just mine, but there are other great ones. I mentioned a couple, but you can find plenty. Focus on your customer effort and your employee effort to make things easier. You will get more sales. You will have more engaged team members. And whenever you're trying to persuade people, make your slide both slippery and steep. Thank you so much. I hope we can do this in person sometime soon. But in the meantime, stay safe.
E me fala, gente, neurolovers de plantão, o que vocês acharam? Porque eu achei sensacional. Não, eu tava vendo vocês falando aqui no chat, falando mais sobre pesquisas. Gente, sem pesquisa não somos ninguém, né? E, nossa, achei muito bom mesmo. Surreal. Roberto tinha comentado várias coisas. A Silvânia também comentou bastante. Enfim, gente. A Bárbara também estava aqui. Muita coisa estava acontecendo. E eu acho maravilhoso vocês terem essa interação e terem também esses insights durante as aulas, durante suas palestras. E, tudo isso que vocês estão comentando aqui no chat, coloca lá no relatório, é bem importante. Porque não é só pra gente isso, é pra vocês. Porque quando a gente anota, a gente lembra, fica fresco na memória, né? Mas vamos lá. Recadinhos da vez. Temos o nosso certificado, que vocês já estão cansados de saber, não é mesmo? E também o sorteio. Vamos ter sorteio hoje. Mas assim, vou inteirar algumas coisas para vocês. Conversei com algumas pessoas no particular, outras aqui no chat, mas vou falar para todos vocês. O que acontece? A gente tem um sistema de sorteio que ele vai lá no post, que vocês já estão cansados de saber também, e pega aqueles comentários e faz sorteio com aqueles comentários. A gente indicou até, no mínimo, 2 pessoas marcadas ali. Só que assim, quanto mais você comentar lá no post, maior as suas chances de ganhar. Então, o que aconteceu? Teve pessoas que ganhou 2 vezes, mas lá nas regrinhas está escrito que não pode ser mais de uma vez, porque a gente tem que pensar no nosso amiguinho, pensar no nosso neurolover e abrir essa oportunidade para outras pessoas também, né? Então, assim, ontem mesmo, que a gente acabou sorteando mais de 5 vezes, né? Porque se não bater nessas 5 vezes a pessoa estar online, a gente pega e fala, seguinte, se você foi sorteado e chamar a gente até as 10 horas da manhã do outro dia, tá valendo. Mas se passou das 10 horas da manhã do outro dia, aí perdeu a chance. Aí, se você for sorteado de novo, ok. Se você não for, So sorry, você não estava online. Só que aconteceu que a gente falou assim, não, peraí, vamos dar mais uma chance, eu tenho certeza que agora vai. Sorteamos até 6 vezes e não foi, né? Acho que foi anteontem. E aí, beleza. Hoje temos em torno de quase 50 pessoas online. Então, dentre essas pessoas que estão online, espero realmente que essa pessoa que a gente vai sortear esteja aqui. Então, assim, a gente vai sortear até 5 vezes, ok? Então, a gente vai. A primeira não foi sorteada? Foi sorteada e não está no chat, não mandou oi, não chamou lá no Instagram? Vamos para a próxima. Não foi sorteada, não chamou a gente aqui? Próximo. Isso 5 vezes, ok? E se eu chorar um pouquinho aqui no chat privado, a gente consegue 6 vezes, mas eu espero que de primeira a gente consiga realmente sortear essa pessoa. Mas, gente, a gente tá fazendo esse sorteio com uma forma de agrado para vocês, porque vocês merecem, estão aqui no domingo, cheio de dopamina. Mas a gente tem os nossos bônus, tem mais de 55% de desconto na turma 6, porque é muito importante para nós que mais pessoas tenham a palavra da NeuroWeek, né? Vamos ser sinceros. Porque como vocês viram durante todas essas aulas, todas essas palestras, a neurociência aplicada aos negócios é extremamente importante para a evolução da empresa. Porque se você não evolui, você morre, né? Eu vejo muitas empresas, eu vou no shopping, eu falo, meu Deus, como tá ultrapassado fazer determinada coisa, né? Mas enfim, se eu começar a falar, eu não paro mais. Entra lá no meu Instagram, porque eu tô fazendo vários desabafos, né? Mas bora! Bora pro sorteio? Vai, galera, solta aí. Dispara o sorteio! Bora lá. Então, bora pro sorteio. Mas antes disso, os nossos bônus que eu conversei com vocês sobre os 20 primeiros, essa questão da mentoria, que é muito importante, e tudo isso que vocês já sabem. O sorteio é legal, é uma coisa interessante, mas se você tem um desconto de 55%, vamos dizer que é metade de um sorteio, o material bônus que tá lá no painel de controle. Aqui na descrição vai ter o link para você acessar direto lá. Pedir para a galera colocar lá no link para facilitar as pessoas que estavam comentando aqui no chat que não estavam achando, ok? Para a gente ajudar vocês. Então, vamos hoje para o curso de Neurogestão, que eu particularmente vou fazer. Então, vamos lá? E vamos para o sorteio. Ai, meu Deus. Ai, meu coração. Será que quem vai ganhar hoje que esteja presente? Vamos lá. 3, 2, 1. Você está por aqui. A Lilian. Lilian, você está por aqui. Me fala que você está por aqui. Cadê a Lilian? Ai, meu Deus. Esse delay me deixa louca, porque aí vocês não respondem na hora. Ai, cadê? Vamos ver. O tempo está passando. Você está online. Conta pra tia. Nossa, pra tia é tenso, hein? Lilian, cadê você? Olha, se você comentou no post, não tá presente na live, aí complica a minha vida. Ai, ai, ai. Vamos ver. Não se esqueçam, manda um alô pra gente aqui no chat, só pra gente entusiasmar junto com você. Ou Ou não, né? E manda lá no Instagram também. Ô, tia! Ai, sacanagem! Tá bom, pelo jeito ela não tá mesmo. Ó, a galera aqui. Oh, Deus! Vai, energia positiva, vamos. Que seja alguém daqui. Vamos lá. Vamos ver. Domingos na praia, real. Vamos ver. Gente, mas já foi. Mas, Valquíria, mas você comentou tanto assim, bem. Tô amando. Tá vendo, gente? Vocês têm que seguir ela. O tanto que ela comentou, ela já até saiu mais vez. Maravilhoso! Mas vamos para o próximo sorteio? Pois é, Érica! De tanto que ela comentou. Pra você ter uma noção. Vamos lá. Ah, não, gente. Ah, não, gente. Tá vendo o que dá comentar várias vezes? É isso que dá comentar várias vezes. Vamos ver a próxima. Estamos sorteando outro, relaxa. 3, 2, 1. Mas não é possível. O negócio tá. Não. Mas não é possível. Ah, não, gente. Não, depois eu quero ver. Eu vou lá, vou contar quantas vezes ela comentou. Tá vendo como vale a pena comentar? É, gente. Não é só sorte, não. É estratégica. Podia estar bugado, né? Olha lá, eles estão entrando lá. E vamos sortear de novo. Vamos lá, vamos lá. Vamos lá que eu estou ansiosa. 3, 2, 1. Ah, não. Não, não é possível. Alguém avisa. Ah, não, gente. Tem que rir pra não chorar. Vamos mais uma vez. Não, nem vai contar a 5. Nem vai contar. Nem vai contar. Vamos lá, mais uma vez. 3, 2, 1. Ah, não! Gente, eu vou lá apagar os comentários dela. Ai, não é possível. Ai. Não, melhor é aqui no chat, pessoal conversando. É bug. Pior que não é bug. É que ela comentou realmente muitas vezes. Vamos lá, gente. Muita coisa tá acontecendo. Tem que rir pra não chorar, realmente. E o último post. O pessoal falou pra entrar em modo anônimo. Ah, peraí, saiu outra pessoa. Marina com 2 As, underline Fátima. Você está por aqui? Cadê? Eu também tô rindo. Você está por aqui? Cadê você? Cadê você? A Marina tá on, ó. Já falaram que você tá on. Cadê tu? Cadê tu? Marina já ganhou também? Marina Fátima já foi também? Tá dormindo. Ó, eu acho que ela tava aqui, aí ela pegou e falou: opa! Neurocirurgia é importante para todas as áreas da vida. Sim, já ganhou. Ah, realmente, galera. Vocês estão mais antenados que eu, porque olha. E vamos de mais uma, ok? Agora vai. Agora vai. Caio Talks. Cadê tu? Caio Talks, você está por aí? Vamos ver, vamos ver. Não lembro de ter visto esse nome hoje. Vamos ver. Esse é novo. Bora, Caio! Cadê tu? Ó, mas vamos pensar por um lado. Se essas pessoas não estão aqui, abre chances para você que tá aqui ganhar, né? Ai, meu Deus! Não é possível. Vou passar a tarde comentando dar certo amanhã. Por favor, Clarice, comenta lá trocentas vezes, igual a Valkyria, pra gente fazer o negócio acontecer. Vamos lá, 3, 2, 1. Ah, não. Tá vendo por que as pessoas ganham? Porque elas comentam um monte de vezes. É por isso que as pessoas ganham. Ô, gente, mas eu tô falando todo dia que pode comentar mais. Eu tô falando, gente, comenta. Quanto mais vocês comentarem, mais chance vocês têm de ganhar. Não faz isso comigo. Faz que eu faço sozinha. Até o pessoal da IBN tá ali desesperado. Jesus! Vamos lá. 3, 2, 1. Ah, não. Não, gente, eu tô desistindo aqui. Eu tô desfalecida já, entendeu? Eu acho que a gente devia fazer aquele esquema, colocar só os nomes de quem tá aqui, a gente vai e faz. Podia acontecer isso? Podia. É fácil fazer isso? Não. Vamos lá. Peraí que eu não... O pessoal da IBN eu não enxergo. Ajuda a tia. Olha lá. PY Arts Galeria. Vamos ver se tá por aqui. Vamos ver. O post tá um pouquinho mais para baixo. Tá escrito sorteio. E ele tá como carrossel as outras postagens. Para exatamente acontecer, para não acontecer esse tipo de coisa. Tipo, eu tenho que pesquisar em vários lugares diferentes. Comentar todo dia. Então a gente colocou tudo num post só. Ó, igual o programa do Silvio Santos. Ah, mas aí é sacanagem, hein? Ó, vou entrar aqui só para mostrar para vocês. Ó, como é facinho. Tá focando? Se você abaixar um pouquinho... Aí, peraí que eu não enxergo. Peraí, aqui, ó. Sorteio. Opa. Aqui, ó. Tá aqui para as laterais, ó. Tá vendo? Estão todos aqui. Vamos lá. Vamos ver, vamos ver. Vamos lá. Cada um aqui fala o número e vocês sorteiam. Olha, isso daí não é comigo. Podia ser, mas não é. Ribas, SP, você está por aqui? Você está por aqui? Vamos ser sinceros. Vamos criar uma amizade sincera. Vamos lá, vamos criar uma amizade sincera. Você está por aqui? Cadê? Ribas presente. Cadê? Onde você está? Ai, é complicado, porque, olha, temos muitos comentários lá e a gente tem 40 pessoas, mais ou menos, online. Então, isso pode acontecer, sim. Quem faz ao vivo. Aí, tá vendo? A Marina Fátima respondeu trocentas vezes. É isso que acontece. Tô ficando nervoso aqui. Só marcou um? Ah, não, Ribas. Você marcou um só? Não, você tá de sac... Não. Não é possível. Ó, o post tá mais aqui embaixo, ó. Você pode descer um pouquinho. E ele tá bem aqui no meio. Sorteio aqui. Tá, sorteio. Ah, gente, eu já desisti até de comentar essa situação. Vou lá pagar os comentários tudo, você vai ver. Brincadeira, eu não tenho essa autonomia. Ah lá. Coloca a opção de quem não repetir quem já foi sorteado. Galera aqui do PV, dá uma olhadinha nisso. Gente, que nervoso. Sim, 3, 2, 1. Olha, foi um nome diferente. Me fala que essa pessoa tá por aqui. Essa pessoa tá por aqui? World Build 1911. Você está por aqui? Cadê tu? Ai, gente, fala que esse é o último. Ai, cadê? Cadê? Eu, Renato de Paula. Ribas, sorteiozinho aqui de Portugal. Olha só. Arroba Bia, sim. Aleluia, alguém ganhou lá em cima. Gente, não esquece. Comenta lá no Instagram. Corre lá, porque o pessoal daqui da IBN já tá conversando comigo para ver se a pessoa mandou mensagem lá no Insta. Olha só. Hashtag fica a dica, hein? Dá um curso gratuito para todo mundo que tá aqui. Manda um oi lá no Insta. Ó, se a pessoa não mandar lá, até as 10 horas da manhã de amanhã, ainda vale. Mas depois das 10 horas da manhã, não vale mais. Não vale. Ó, peraí que eu estou esperando o feedback. Aí a gente pode encerrar. Ganhou. Ai, eu não acredito! Depois da Valkyria ter saído 99 vezes, a Mariana saindo mais 99 vezes. Foi! Pois é, parabéns! É, Renato. E faz tempo que você quer ganhar, né? Você tá desde o primeiro dia comentando. Arrasou! É isso, gente. Muitíssimo obrigado pelo dia de hoje. Eu espero amanhã vocês. Ó, fica de olho lá no Insta pra gente tá mandando algumas informações, como sempre, tá bom? Gente, eu tô muito feliz. Um dia cheio de dopamina pra vocês neste domingão, tá bom? Comenta lá no nosso Insta, marca a gente, faz aquele rebuliço, tá bom? Um beijo, bom domingo a todos. Eu sou a Bia Ferreira e espero vocês amanhã. Beijo!